Thank you everyone for joining our Real Recognition session. What makes a great recognition strategy? I am Tamika Figaro and I will be moderating today's conversation. I'm also joined by our Chief Learning Officer, Roy Sanderson. Welcome, Roy.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Yes, thanks for being here. Roy is a recognition strategist at Engage to Excel. He's the author of Practicing Recognition, How to Give Meaningful Recognition to People Every Day. Roy consults and educates leaders and staff members in companies around the world on recognition practices, strategy, and programs in the workplace, helping them to give real recognition the right way wherever they work. Before I get into the conversation, as usual, I want to remind everyone that we are recording the session. All attendees are on mute, so if you want to add a comment or if you have a question that you would like us to ask at any time of the conversation, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. I will ask the questions at the very end of my conversation with Roy. All right, that's it for me. Let's get started.
Okay.
So Roy, what's the first thing you look for with a recognition strategy?
Yes, I've seen a lot of recognition strategies over the years. I've been a member of Recognition Professionals International's judging committee for the past 15 years. And I think we reckon there was about 80 organizations that I've seen just through the nominations that have been submitted. So I see a lot of the recognition strategy, which is the first best practice standards that RPI has. And I think that the most important thing to look for is the strategic intent that's present in a recognition strategy. I'm looking for a strong future vision of where they want recognition to end up. Where do they see recognition going forward into the future? I think it's got to inspire people. It's got to inspire the leaders. It's got to inspire employees when they see the complete document of what a recognition strategy and plan looks like. And it's got to be inspiring. It's got to be motivating. It's got to be something like, wow, this is what our organization believes in for recognition. And I think it has to be aligned with the people, the performance, and the culture of the organization to help people know that we've got a solid foundation for this recognition strategy. And those are some of the exciting things that I kind of look for when I'm looking at a recognition strategy.
Great. And once you've looked into the strategy, how do you help leaders to identify their recognition purpose?
Okay. Yeah, I think it's important that you identify what the purpose is for recognition. Most have them. They may be strengthening the culture. They may be, trying to improve engagement or certain measures that's of concern or strategic initiatives. But I think it's, you need to ask your leaders or whoever's involved in creating and crafting a recognition purpose statement is to identify, why exactly are we recognizing people? And it sounds corny, but when you stop and ask the why questions, then the how becomes fairly obvious, and you know what we need to do. What is the organization's purpose for recognizing people? Is it just to retain people, or is it to truly appreciate their contributions? Are we appreciating people independent of their work? I mean, it's amazing when you get down to the nitty-gritty of why we're recognizing, that you get a lot of discussion coming out from people, and finally it's down on paper. And I think we also have to think about, why are we recognizing our employees from the eyes of our clients, our patients, our customers? Why should we be recognizing our employees in their eyes? And of course, there's a lot of research that shows that when you put employees first, the customers automatically arise in the customer service or the way they're treated, and it goes hand in hand. So I think it's important to ask questions. There's no one way of doing this, and every time I've facilitated recognition strategy documents, I've certainly seen the wording that comes out so unique to the organization. It's like you could almost say, oh my goodness, that's this organization or that's that organization. It's so unique and personal, if you will, personalized to that organization. It's kind of exciting to see.
Yeah, interesting. And have you identified where do people typically get themselves into trouble with recognition strategy development?
Yeah, it's interesting you should say that. I think there are probably two areas that organizations typically get into trouble with this whole process. And the first is not taking the time to understand the difference between recognition and rewards. They are different, and I think you need to differentiate them. You need to understand, you might have a recognition strategy and you might have a total reward strategy. And then maybe the recognition and rewards gets combined. Maybe there's an overlap, like a Venn diagram between the two. So if you know the difference and how to use them well, then I think the strategy becomes easier to facilitate. I think then you're looking at recognition practices, the kind of day-to-day interpersonal things that you do, as well as the recognition programs. How are our online tools, programs, going to be an effective tool to help people practice giving recognition? So once we get some terminology, definitions understood amongst those who will be involved in creating the strategy, then I think you're going to be a more solid footing. I think the second thing that people get into trouble with is not getting the right people in the room to help be facilitated in crafting the recognition strategy. You do need some very strong leadership support in there. You may have some managers in there, and you may, depending on the size of the organization, choose to have some employees in the room. And it's a wordsmithing exercise on being able to at least get the purpose and philosophy down before they can understand perhaps the gaps that you have as an organization to really craft the full strategy together.
These are great insights, Roy. And for anyone who wants us to elaborate on the questions, please feel free to ask the questions on the Q&A functions. And if you have comments, you can also add them in there. I will get to all of them at the end of the conversation. So Roy, tell us, how can organizations figure out a way to see what their overall objective should be?
All right. Yeah, looking at the overall objective for improving recognition in your organization certainly requires that you do a gap or analysis or recognition assessment, where you're looking at the policies, procedures, programs, practices of recognition in an organization to see how good they are, how are they stacking up against best practices. We certainly support recognition professional internationals in RPI's best practice standards. There are 7 standards. The first, of course, is having a recognition strategy. Then you have management responsibility, program measurement, communication planning, recognition training, events and celebrations, and of course, just change and flexibility, the whole continuous improvement of recognition. Now, those are great standards to at least look at your own organizations to see how you stack up, how are you doing in those areas. And when you know the strengths and weaknesses of your recognition practices and recognition programs, I have found that when you get a group of people in the room and you give them, a summary, an executive summary perhaps of the assessment findings, they can say, wow, we really need to improve in this area. I've had it where we need to get more consistent with recognition. Or I've seen it where organizations have said, we really need to help people understand what recognition is and what we expect from them. It's amazing. It can be very, very simple, one overall objective that kind of almost steers the direction of the strategy. I like to think that a strategy is maybe like a year-long document. And so that overall objective is very critical for the group of people who are being facilitated and creating a recognition strategy can identify. So look at the strengths and weaknesses, do a needs assessment, and then kind of say, wow, if there was one thing and only one thing that we could do to improve recognition, what would we say that it is? And so, you get agreement and consensus from those in the room to help narrow down and target what we're going to work on.
So what objectives should an organization have for their recognition strategy?
All right, so that it still becomes very unique to each organization. I never cookie cutter, what the goals should be for every single organization. And again, it's facilitated. So when you're developing the goals for improving recognition, you have that overall one-year goal, so to speak. And then you're trying to look for that thematic change that needs to happen. And then based on that gap analysis that you've done and the recognition assessment, you need to identify where we need to, what are the things we need to start doing? What are the things we need to stop doing, and continue doing? And what I like to suggest is that, you look maybe at those 7 best practice standards as a guide, and then there's going to be the glaring, we're not using the programs. Why aren't we using the programs? Oh my goodness, we haven't set expectations for our managers and leaders to even use the programs. We're not communicating those expectations, not giving them the resources to know how to use the programs. We're not holding them accountable. All these things. So you could get accountability, you could get communication planning, you could get education and training. All these areas could be identified depending on the organization where they come up and say, you know what, I think we need to work on these areas, these goal areas. So when those areas come to mind, you deal with them, you look at them as the problems that have been identified from your assessment, and you move forward on setting goals to improve recognition in your organization specific to the gaps and barriers that you have.
Great. And have you noticed where do recognition strategies often fall down?
Oh, yes. Yeah. The biggest key and the biggest problem is implementation. I came up with that word one time after seeing some consultants come into a hospital where I worked, and we did all the flip charts, and we looked at the gaps and the barriers and the weaknesses and strengths. And we made these wonderful goals of what we were going to do, and it sounded great. And I was just a new employee at the time, and I was quite excited to see all of this. But then a year goes by and nothing changed. And I went into the CEO of the hospital and I said, this is a problem. I said, I even joked and said that my mother could have walked in to the hospital and identified what the problems were, but nothing's changed. And he said, and he was a very incisive man, and he kind of said, okay, tell me, what should we do? And I thought, oh my goodness, a CEO is asking me what to do, and I was just a new employee. And so I said, can I come back? And he was a very, you give him 1 or 2 words, that's all you had to give him. So I came back after thinking about it, and it was implementation. Those consultants hadn't given us the tools for implementation. So I suggest that we start with creating a solid recognition plan with those areas of focus, along with objectives that you want to achieve to kind of get those areas of focus worked on, and then have some outcome measures that you derive from those objectives. And you don't want to make this too overwhelming. That's why we just suggest 3, 4, 5, 6 maybe focus areas that you need to focus on. And my recommendation is always to set 90-day action plans on each of those focus areas. If you're a large organization, you can have perhaps teams, volunteer teams of employees, maybe with a specialist. Say communication comes up, you would have one of the communication specialists on your team. If you you had education and training, you might have learning and development as a leader, but have employees in a part of that. Sometimes you get volunteers from that strategy development group who want to be a part of these focus group teams, and then create a 90-day action plan and then review it at 90 days and then keep going with a new 90-day focus. And that becomes really exciting to see the areas prioritized and, worked on, and not just let it sit and nothing happen.
Right. And you talked about being strategic with recognition program. Can you tell us why is a plan of action so important with a recognition strategy?
Yes, and I like to include the two together in a sense, because you have the development of a recognition purpose and philosophy, the reason why and the beliefs around recognition, unique to each organization. You've identified the overall gaps that exist, and so you have a overall perhaps 1-year objective. You've identified from the gap analysis the areas that you need to focus on. So now you need to create this plan, and I like to suggest that people create implementation objectives for each of those focus areas. They need to kind of say how they're going to measure them, and a plan of action literally puts the overall strategy into motion. And that momentum is so critical. So a strategy with purpose and philosophy without a plan isn't really a full strategy as far as I'm concerned. And I think it's a valuable tool to be able to create, so that in a sense, any employee, any leader or manager could look at the recognition strategy and say, wow, this is where we're heading with recognition. Where am I aligned with this or not? And you could then set out the plan of action for making it all happen. And I think if you don't have implementation with a plan, nothing's going to change.
Yes, absolutely. And all right, so I have one last question for you, Roy, but
Okay.
before I get to that, I want to remind again, if our audience has any questions or thoughts, now is a great time to put those in the Q&A, and I'll get to them in just one moment. So Roy, what does it take to make your recognition strategy a success?
Yeah, there is no doubt that when you really do need leadership support, and if you can get an executive leader, for example, to be the sponsor, champion for your recognition strategy, that's very, very powerful. All of a sudden, you've got representation at the C-suite. You've got recognition being fought for, especially when it comes down to funding and other initiatives, maybe starting a new program, whatever. You need someone at the table, the executive table, to be able to defend the cause of recognition. I think when you get a recognition plan created and you can enlist the help of others, large organizations should be able to get teams of people working on those individual focus areas. For smaller organizations, I have to admit, what I recommend is that if they look at those focus areas, that they now prioritize the list, especially when you get one person, managers running recognition, and that's all, they don't have access to other department specialists or things like that. And they just prioritize. And I tell them just to work one through at a time until you've completed the focus areas. I think it's also important to have accountability. That's why I like the 90-day action plans. And what I recommend is that if you've got a group working on a 90-day action plan, that you work together, and at 30 days and 60 days, you send an email update on the progress so far to the overall leader or manager of recognition. And then at 90 days, you create a one-page report on the progress. And if you, sometimes with these volunteer teams, it's been hard to meet, it's been hard to work on with work demands, and they didn't get very far. So the next 90 days, they know they can commit to that initial goal. For some, they've had great success in that first 90 days, and so they're now pushing things along further forward for the next 90 days. And then you go through the 30, 60, 90 day reporting. So I think having that accountability in there and having an executive leader you can report to on the progress, giving regular reports on the achievements to date, and that they can see that recognition is something that will be a driver of the various strategies and goals of the organization, I think is very powerful.
Great. Well, thank you, Roy. These were all my questions. Let's see, though, if we have questions in the Q&A. All right. Okay. We do have a few questions. So someone is asking that you mentioned 7 best practices for recognition. Can you further elaborate on that?
Sure. If you go to recognition.org, I've been on the board for a few years now, but also been involved in the judging of the Recognition Professionals International's Best Practice Awards that we certainly invite you and consider nominating your organization as you align your practices and your programs with those 7 best practice standards. And just a quick review, the first one is recognition strategies. That shows you how important it is. The second one is management responsibility, which kind of deals with the whole accountability piece, examples of, rather than just the team that manages recognition, we need to make sure our managers and leaders are driving recognition and are good examples of recognition. Recognition program measurement is number 3. So we want to make sure that you've got good analytics in place to prove what you're doing with recognition, not just, isn't it great? No, that's nice that you think it's great, but how great is it? I saw one organization the other day that said they just made a 1% improvement. And I'm going, 1% is not that big. So you need to kind of look at these things and kind of ask, what are the measurements behind your programs to show the progress you're making and the satisfaction with the programs, the difference you're making with the programs. 4th is communication planning. Big believers in having communication drive the education recognition programs and practicing recognition in a genuine way. Then you get 5, which is recognition training. How well are you educating and training people to use your programs, as well as how to give more effective and meaningful recognition in person. Number 6 is recognition events and celebrations. And, how well are we organizing those? And what are our goals and objectives? How are we following up on how successful we were with our events and celebrations? And then number 7 is program change and flexibility, which really is kind of a quality improvement. What are we doing to change? Never think that just because you've installed a recognition program that you're done. Is how are you improving it? How are you making progress? How are you improving the redemptions? How are you improving the number of nominations, number of e-cards being sent? How people are feeling about the recognition they receive? Is it making a difference? Again, combining with measurement, for example. These are some of the things that we can do using standards like that to help them.
So there's a next question, and it is, what are some examples of measurement? What are some examples of measurements a recognition strategy can include?
All right, so remember we've talked about focus areas, and depending on the focus area, you're going to have some implementation objectives. So let's say recognition training and education was a big deal, and specific to a certain organization, it might be that they want to just train managers, or they may want to train employees. And so are we going to do that face-to-face? Are we going to create a a learning module? Are we going to create some video instruction? Are we going to do webinars? So depending on the choices that best reflect the needs and the organization, you might have develop a webinar in the next 60 days. You might have attendance levels at that webinar and things like this. So it becomes really kind of think of a funnel coming down. You've got the broad recognition and training, then we've got the needs of the organization saying this is the best way we're going to do it. And then depending on the way that they've chosen, you automatically see ways in which you can measure the outcomes of that implementation objective. So that's my recommendation. So you're getting very functional goals rather than big picture goals.
So someone else is asking, when should an organization revisit their recognition strategy? Is it monthly, yearly, or some other timing?
Yeah, I think number one, you're always visiting your recognition strategy and your recognition plan. You should be doing that monthly as the kind of program owner, quarterly if you have a recognition steering committee or team, and maybe semi-annually with your senior leader. And of course, you're going to have that annual review at the end of a year to be able to make sure your senior leader can present that at the executive leadership team. And then at that point, you may have some major change. There could be a merger that happens, for goodness sakes. That would really warrant an immediate change to kind of adapt and adopt the needs of the new organization, or strengthen it and just make sure they know it as well. And so it's not changed quickly. It needs to be carefully done. I think when you look at the overall objective, that may be an annual revisit. Your purpose and philosophy will likely stay the same for a few years, but it could change. The overall objective may change on an annual basis. The implementation objectives will easily change on an annual basis because the idea is to try and get them done within a year. That's the whole purpose of having the 90-day action plans. So that's the kind of, I tend to look at that 1 year marker as seeing the overall objectives and the implementation objective change for the focus area. The focus areas could change for the next year, for example. So I hope that gives the individual some ideas.
Thank you. So we have another question. Should you include a small group of employees to voice their ideas when it comes to a great strategy?
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm currently doing some virtual focus groups. Can't do it in person like we used to. And it's fascinating hearing the feedback. Sometimes you might have to do that. Sometimes in the recognition assessment stage, you might be collecting input from employees there. When it comes down to the strategy session, where you're trying to facilitate the purpose, the philosophy, and the recognition plan, it's going to be up to the organization whether they just have leaders and managers and they have the employee input through focus groups or surveys, or whether they should include a sampling of employees as well. I have seen permutations and combinations of all kinds as to who is present. And it really does depend on the leadership and the culture of the organization as to whether they should be present and involved.
All right, I think this is our last question. So what are some popular ways to share or give recognition without a software system?
Oh my goodness. We're going right back to where I started, which is the whole recognition practices. You can't beat knowing your employees well, interacting with them on a regular basis, hearing what they're doing, hearing what their colleagues are doing from those interactions, and being able to acknowledge them, praise them, recognize them for the great things they're doing. Verbal recognition, face-to-face recognition, virtual recognition is some of the best ways for recognizing employees. And in many ways, we're talking about how the recognition is expressed. Is it verbally or is it text-based? And while recognition programs are primarily text-based, they can also include videos. You can use the written word to send a wonderful note, a genuine, heartfelt note of appreciation, a handwritten card. These can speak volume. Picking up the phone and calling someone and thanking them. I know a particular bank manager who had their regional president call them after hours and left a voicemail message on their phone. And that bank manager has never erased that voicemail message off their phone because they love to hear it again. Just like the thank you notes, there's some we keep and there's some we discard. And it's because we have a relationship with that person, and because we want to read that card again. We want to read that note and feel the same feelings we had when we first read the note. So it comes down to the practices of personal delivery, personalized recognition in whatever form is going to be best, but don't neglect doing it, especially for those of us who are still working virtually, for example.
Great. It looks like we've answered all the questions that have come in. Hold on, let me
just
just
look. A lot of them today, yeah.
Yes, we have. We're at 32 minutes now, so I'm trying to be respectful of everyone's time. I think we have time for one last question because I see something popping up. It's actually a comment by Lisa Walters. She says, "Love your work and newsletters, Roy. Thanks so much for sharing with us."
Oh, that's kind. Thank you very much, Lisa.
Thank you, Roy, for being part of the conversation today. And for the attendees, we appreciate you joining us. We'll be sending an email with the recording link tomorrow. And we hope everybody has a great day.
Great. Take care, everyone. Thank you, Tamika. Bye-bye.
Bye.